My name is Badra Yusuf. I'm the Managing Director of a local research enterprise based in Mogadishu, Somalia, and I will be moderating this session. In the beginning of this Congress, Isabella said that in the opening session, we often find ourselves in 3 stages. The first stage is, of course, the romance stage, where everything begins, and it's all shiny and nice. We then go through an adjustment process before we reach the fatigue stage. I think it can be also applied to conferences, right? Like this, where we have long days. It's been long days, a lot of discussions on global challenges, and obviously a lot of issues and information to digest. And we probably moved now to the adjustment stage. Hopefully, this session will awaken us again and open the floor for further discussions on how we do our work as humanitarians, especially on the ground. Our session today will focus on the forgotten crisis and how local actors are navigating the complexity of humanitarianism on the ground. Since yesterday, we have been discussing that the different parts of the world face both prolonged but also sudden onset crisis. However, we have not really acknowledged enough in the different platforms the fact that local humanitarian actors continue to be the first responders to every humanitarian emergency on the ground, faster and more efficiently than all other actors, especially sometimes also that the funding doesn't only come from Western countries, but also communities on the ground provide assistance that can be used faster and more efficiently, including the diaspora communities living in different countries. We have realized that also local actors remain active long after international actors have winded down their engagement. While the humanitarian international system is heavily driven by political agenda and of course also media attention, which is something that have been discussed yesterday and today in the morning as well. And it seems that in turn, it's also reliant on sudden onset events. So local actors, as we have seen on the ground, cannot simply shift their attention like how we do, and some of us on the other part of the world, and move it to the next humanitarian crisis in the next country that have crisis. In nature, we are deeply ingrained in the local societies that we work for actually, and thereby we are held accountable by the communities that we serve. This makes us local actors particularly vulnerable to shifting attention that has been discussed yesterday and today, which oftentimes translates to a shift of funding and political support as well. In neglected and forgotten crises, local actors are essentially forced to compensate for the shortcomings of the international humanitarian system, which doesn't perform adequately when faced with a slow onset, long-term crisis. Such a gathering is where we critically discuss the paradoxes of humanitarian action, but we can only do so if we put the local perspective as front and center of the ongoing discussions of the humanitarian system reform, especially given this year's theme of the Congress. Our approach to this panel is different and unique. We will not only have a panel of experts and agreeing with each other on the stage. Instead, we will have 3 local experts from the Philippines, Lebanon, and Chad, who will directly explain to us the damaging effects of the attention-driven humanitarian system. The experts will explore 3 key areas, one being how the local actors are affected by the shifting or missing public, political, and media attention. They will also share adaptation strategies deployed by the local actors in order to continue to benefit the marginalized communities despite the shifting attention and neglect. We will also hear from the experts what role do they play in keeping attention focused on the crisis in their communities. The experts will also put on the table pragmatic recommendations on how we can overcome the humanitarian attention spiral. Our session will be concluded today with an interactive exchange with the audiences on how the humanitarian attention spiral can be overcome and what role we all as actors can play in reducing systematic inequalities in the humanitarian system. For those of you who are online, you can participate by commenting on Twitter using the hashtag Berlin HC Berlin. You are also welcome to comment and post questions in the Zoom Q&A window. And I would like to also remind you that there will be a live captioning and live translation available into both French and Spanish. With that, I would like to welcome our first panelist, Nanette Antequisa, who's joining us online from the Philippines. Nanette has over 30 years of experience in the Philippines, working on development, humanitarian, and peace building. She's the founding executive director of EcoWeb, established in 2006, a strong advocate of the survivor and community-led crisis response approach, and she also serves as a convener of the community-led Empowering Action for Resilience Network. Mrs. Nanette also serves as the chair of Alliance for Empowering Partnership, a signatory of the Ground Bargain, and is a member of the coordination group of the Charter for Change. Please welcome with me, Mrs. Nanette Antequisa.
Thank you, Badra. Good day in Germany and good evening from the Philippines. First, let me thank also our partner, HELP from Germany and the Humanitarian Congress Berlin for the opportunity given to me. While I could not be physically present due to my health condition, I am grateful to be able to participate still, and thanks to technology. As a local humanitarian actor in the Philippines and a strong advocate of localization and locally led humanitarian actions, I really do value local voices to be heard by the humanitarian international community, for these voices often bear the brunt of forgotten and neglected crises. As we navigate the shifting tides of public, political, and media attention, shedding light on the challenges faced by the affected and vulnerable communities and how they overcome and sustain is just compelling. Hence, even just virtually, I just feel really motivated to share my insights, our experience, and our journey. It is a journey that unveils the profound impact of community-led responses to crisis. We'll delve into the stories of resilient communities and individuals who, despite facing an unimaginable adversity, have found strength in unity, adaptability in crisis, and hope in their collective actions through what we call survivor and community-led response to crisis approach. SLR as an approach, it considers the affected population not as victims, but survivors with capacity to plan, lead, manage, implement the response, and do the resilience-building actions. We provide microgrants and trust that with it, they are able to strengthen further their capacity. In my 30 years of development and humanitarian work, I share the same observation with other CSOs, the colleagues in the Alliance for Empowering Partnership in other countries, on how international humanitarian aid tends to be driven by public, political, and media attention. That when the world's attention shifts elsewhere, so does the flow of aid. And even in the aftermath of major disasters, aid often dwindles once the international media spotlight moves on, as was the case with some crisis here in the Philippines.
Nanette, I think you are muted. You will have to unmute yourself.
Hello, this one?
Yes, we can hear you now. Maybe you can repeat the last points. I think we missed some of the points that you said.
All right. Hello?
Yes, Nanette, we can hear you.
All right. So you can, all right. So, yeah, I just said that just like in the 2013 September, just 2 months after that Zamboanga crisis, somehow was overshadowed immediately by Haiyan, and then the 2017 Marawi crisis, overshadowed again by the typhoon Rai that happened in 2021. And I would say the crisis also of countries are easily overshadowed by events in other countries, just like Ukraine, that's happening. And when the media's attention is, so does the flow of aid as well. This video shows a street demonstration of Marawi IDPs that happened just few days ago. They were originally displaced in 2017 and now find themselves facing another round of displacement due to imminent closure of the temporary shelter. These individuals are part of the remaining 80,000 IDPs who have been awaiting return to normalcy after 6 long years since the infamous Marawi siege. The siege resulted in the displacement of 98% of over 200,000 Marawi city's population. Well, being on top of in the World Risk Index in 2022, it means that the Philippines is not only facing major disasters. Vulnerable communities in different parts of the country have to face various hazards and localized disaster risks. Take, for instance, the climate-induced shoreline phenomenon that struck communities in Mindanao and Visayas in the last quarter of 2022 that lasts actually until 2023 first quarter. The so-called shoreline phenomenon brought continuous rain and destructive flooding in Clarin Town, for example, in the Christmas Eve of 2022. It was the first kind of massive disaster per memory of the populace. The flooding caused massive displacement, affecting a quarter of the 40,000 population of the municipality, damaged many homes, livelihoods, and properties. The localized storm wiped out the anti-flood river dikes, even inundated innumerable households, washed out personal belongings, destroyed infrastructures, combed the rice fields, and immobilized the local economy. But due to its lack of international media attention, Clarin and most of the devastated communities received no international traditional humanitarian aid. The question is, what happens to communities when the world turns its back? I can tell you that they do not give up. They persevere because they have no other choice. They come together, harnessing their own resilience and resourcefulness with any assistance that are provided to them. They become their first own responders. This reality on the ground is what inspires EcoWeb more and our network, the ClearNet we call, to promote the survivor and community-led crisis response approaches. Our partner communities have illustrated that in times of crisis and emergencies, mere giving and charity are insufficient. It is imperative that the rights and dignity of the affected population become the primary responsibility of every humanitarian actor. This involves empowering those affected to plan, prioritize, make decisions, take leadership roles, and execute essential actions for response, recovery, and resilience building. Our extensive experience has demonstrated that when we forge effective partnerships with affected communities and let them lead, we not only achieve a more substantial impact, but also conduct more cost-effective operations. This is particularly crucial in a world where humanitarian aid often falls short of meeting the escalating needs arising from the increasing humanitarian crisis and growing threats of climate change and conflict. At this juncture, let me share a few stories from the ground, a glimpse into the transformative potential and power of the community-led approaches. This is a story when we started to promote the SLR approach in 2017. It was first piloted in the remote indigenous communities in eastern Mindanao affected by flash flood. Some houses along the river banks were washed out. Farms were heavily devastated. It took us about a day journey combined with boat rides.
Nanette, you will also need to unmute yourself again.
Sorry. So it seems that is anyway. Yeah, so in one affected community, we were showed how families survived by consuming the poisonous root crops that people have to meticulously process to make them edible. Due to remoteness, no media coverage, hence no assistance reached them. It was the IP community who helped themselves, and then the IP leaders reached out to us for some help. So we partnered with the indigenous community structure. They planned with the affected population. They prioritized. So we provided some support. Sorry, my slide is not moving anymore. Yeah, there. And so they prioritized. Then we allocated some, that was about 10,000 USD. That was initially allocated. More than 500 families were affected. Initially, it was just budgeted for 3 identified IP communities, but then the community decided they have to also help other affected communities to others in more remote communities. They decided to purchase rice and other food and non-food items, but they also agreed immediately to purchase seeds and farm implements to be able to start the farm recovery process immediately. And they also purchased carpentry tools, allocated some support for the construction of shelters for those who lost their houses. They planned everything from transportation. They tapped the support from the local governments and other local resources that they could tap. They transported the goods from the city to their town center, which is really like a distance about 160 kilometers, and then boat travel to the community. It was so difficult. I observed it myself. One boat tilted, submerging few sacks of rice, and they salvaged it. I told myself, if it were us who managed the project implementation, it could have been a very huge challenge for us. But the community did it. In 2 weeks' time, they completed all the processes, including the distribution and tribal ritual, and even mobilized those local resources themselves. Another story, this is in Itugon story, this community affected of landslide due to sustained heavy rains and Typhoon Mangkhut in 2018. It also demonstrated how community leadership could result to addressing priority needs of affected communities. The 3 groups each just received about $5,000 prioritized livelihoods for many families affected. Third group prioritized the construction of a water system. With local technical support, they sourced it themselves. They were able to finish the installation in 1 month time, despite its remoteness and the difficulty of bringing the materials to the hinterlands in the mountain. And the water system, it still exists until this day, and they expanded even its services to the nearby communities. And the livelihoods that they have started, that they plan and decide by themselves, it surely helped much the recovery of the families affected. Another story was during the Typhoon Rai in December 2021. Super typhoon affected more than 10 million people across 10,000 villages in 11 regions. Nearly 3 million people were displaced, more than 400 killed, and a total of 1.9 million houses have been damaged. 10 million crops were destroyed. Among those affected was this Mamanwa community in Mabuhay Sison. They were among the 91 communities we have assisted within the first 100 days of the disaster, together with our local partners on the ground and with the communities as our partner. Yes, this particular community, they just actually requested $3,000 and to complement their other resources. Luz Mindahaga in the picture, a leader in this community, was sharing the how they made use actually of that assistance. So while they endeavor to recover from the livelihood and also yearn to preserve their culture, they regard education as a powerful tool to empower themselves and equip them with skills to enhance their employment opportunities and break free from the cycle of poverty and, of course, reduce inequality. Hence, they included in their priority for the use of microgrant the construction of 1 classroom. Just imagine the little 3,000. We are able to construct 1 classroom to accommodate actually more IP children that are incoming as grade 5 at that time, and there's no classroom. And on top of that, they allocated some amount for their livelihoods recovery, including the bamboo, the broom that they are producing traditionally. They hope to have sustainable livelihoods. However, their aspirations go beyond economic success. They yearn for partnerships that respect the rights and aspirations. For their story is not simply of recovery from Typhoon Rai. The Mabuhay village is the refuge of these indigenous people after they were dislocated from their ancestral domain due to a mining company's entry into their lands. It is a stark reminder that sometimes economic strategies can overshadow the rights and heritage of indigenous communities as well. Now, what happened to Marawi? Well, for the Marawi IDPs, through the SLR approach, we have actually provided a number of support, enabled IDPs to initiate recovery of livelihoods, provide basic needs in the aftermath of the 2017 crisis. But it's not only that, it's really like the power in this is for able to organize themselves and advocate for the protection of the rights and dignity of the displaced. One major accomplishment was the sustained advocacy by the empowered IDPs. It resulted to the passage of the Marawi Victims Compensation Act that was passed just last year. It was 5 years after the siege. Among the strong IDP leaders who relentlessly lobbied in Congress and Senate until the law was passed was the Sharia lawyer, Khaddour. And for this year, they are already allocated 1 billion pesos by the government for the implementation of the law. It is not enough though. To complete the process of compensation, if only 1 billion per year, so it may take 17 years to fully compensate all the victims. Hence, for the IDPs, this will be a continuing advocacy for them so that they will be able really to enjoy the benefit of this law, and of course, while also sustaining their advocacy for shelter and their eventual return to their beloved Marawi. These stories are not just anecdotes. These are testaments to the incredible power of communities when given the chance to lead their own recovery. They are living proof that survivor and community-led approaches work, not just in major disasters, but in localized emergencies, which are often overlooked by the international system. For more than 6 years now, we at ICAWED and ClearNet partners really have hundreds of stories on community-led actions in different parts of the country in response to various disaster events. Actions range from survival to recovery to resilience building, as well as advocacies, and actions that hopes address root causes of community vulnerabilities. While there are some challenges in the community-led approach, but overall ground experience show its strategic positive impact to making local actors and communities as partners in finding durable solutions to their vulnerabilities to disaster risk and displacement and to building resilience of communities. Now going back to the leading questions. On the question, how are local humanitarian actors affected by shifting or missing public, political, and media attention? My answer? They are affected deeply, but they refuse to be defeated. They adapt, they innovate, they continue to advocate, and they become the lifeline for their communities. On the question which adaptation strategies are being deployed by local actors continue benefiting marginalized communities despite shifting attention and neglect, they adapt by forging partnerships with all who believe and trust local capacities. They continue to mobilize resources to work with marginalized communities in building the resilience and tapping into the resourcefulness. They continue advocating for people's rights and enable affected and vulnerable people as actors themselves for the protection of their rights and for building the resilience. Question, can the humanitarian attention spiral be overcome by tailoring humanitarian donor policies, funding, and programming to the needs of local humanitarian actors? Based on our experience, yes, it can. Some of our international partners, including philanthropists, have already demonstrated it with us. However, it is not yet the general practice. It is not yet the norm, hence we need to do more actions towards systems change. Resonating our call with the Alliance for Empowering Partnership in the Grand Bargain, I wish to call from this Humanitarian Congress Berlin for more champions to advocate to shift donor policies. 1, to make humanitarian aid more flexible to enable the local actors, lead the process, and enable the affected people, the decision makers, of aid utilization to effectively address their priority needs and strengthen their capacity. Second, to make humanitarian aid more equitable in all countries and communities experiencing protracted crisis and affected of climate change, and ensure equitable partnership with local actors who remain steadfast in their commitment to the forgotten and neglected. And third, to make humanitarian aid responsive and purposive, not only in saving lives in crises and emergencies, but in making it a means towards reducing humanitarian needs and help address the multidimensional root causes of vulnerabilities of communities and of crisis itself. In closing, let us remember that humanitarianism is not just about responding to crisis. It is about restoring dignity, empowering communities, and upholding human rights. It is about ensuring that no one is left behind, that no crisis is forgotten, and that every community has a chance to rebuild and thrive. As we leave this Humanitarian Congress, Berlin, let us carry with us the stories of resilience, the power of community-led approaches, and the call to action. Let us commit to change, not just in policy, but in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanette, and for joining us despite your health conditions, and also for reminding us the remarkable local stories on how communities take leadership roles and execute essential actions for not only response, but also recovery and building community resilience. Our second panel expert is from Djibert. Master Moussa will take us back to the forgotten crisis in his home country, Djibert, and the work that he's doing with his team to fill the gaps left by the international humanitarian actors. He will also share with us how the systematic inequalities affect the work his NGO and others are doing on the ground. Mohamed started working as a humanitarian and development sector during the 2003 Darfur crisis in Sudan. He has almost 20 years of experience working with local communities, and he also directs the first aid organization born from localization in Chad, HTD. Please welcome with me, Mohamed.
This is working. Good morning. I have a privilege to be here to present our local organization from Chad. And I'm here to say that I'm going to present the very first born local organization from Chad, which is born from localizations. And then as Badra present, my name is Moussa, and I'm the managing director of the local NGOs, which is called HCB, Association Help Chad for Development. And maybe people are going to ask why we are the very first local organization born from localizations, because of our determinations. Originally, the German organization HELP, Hilfe selbst Hilfe, if I pronounce it well. So we in Chad, we used to call it Help from Germany. They intervened in Eastern Chad from 2003, following the Darfur crisis, to assist the Sudanese refugees in the water sector. As HELP local staff experience and skills grew, they started taking more responsibilities from HELP from Germany. This is how in 2012, we local staff, we have created Association Help Chad pour le Développement, this is in French, HTD in 2012, and now has become a very respectful and trusted local humanitarian and development organization. Today, our organization consists of 43 employees, and we are very active in various sectors, like wash, food security, health, nutrition, protection, and so on. So now let's see the advantage of local organization. The advantage of local organization, as the name said, local, because it is their presence in the area. They have easy access to the areas. They are quick, active and quick relief without lengthy procedures. And they are accepted by the communities. And they have efficient channeling of support. This is like from donors to the beneficiaries without any intermediaries, with excellent results. And their works can achieve the same objective as an international NGOs or UN agencies with the reasonable resources. Last but not least, they are flexible and rapid actions planning and implementation. This will take us to the role now. Which role the local organizations are playing in the forgotten crisis? Local actors are left behind when the international leaves. They have to bear all the consequences. They have to continue the work and then be the leading in the area. They lead the operations. They become typically an implementation partner who agrees to almost anything. They work with the short-term projects. They carry out important actions with the little means. They reach out and cover fewer areas and less beneficiaries than before because they don't have the means to cover larger areas or more beneficiaries. They began to write proposals and search for funding. And this is where the problem begins now with the locals, when they are looking for fundings. So this will take us to the challenges that locals are facing. We have identified 3 core challenges associated with our work as a local NGOs. First of all is lack of funding, lack of supervision, and lack of involvement. I'm going to explain. From my experience of working in the humanitarian sectors in eastern of Chad, I've realized that more value is attributed to Western organizations than to local expertise and understanding of the context. I can say that, in short, funding comes from the West, and it's the Western organizations which are managing their resources. This is my belief, sorry. And the last example, I can just give one example of this. Just 3 months ago, 2 international NGOs got a project, a resilience project in Eastern Chad for millions. They presented this project to the humanitarian communities. By the end of the presentation, they say now they are looking for a local NGOs, 2 local NGOs to implement the projects. You see how the locals are not really taken into consideration during the implementation, the research, and all this. And then we are facing another challenge is inflexible funding mechanism and compliance rules with the donors, because they are putting into a system when you see a proposals that you know that definitely local actors are not eligible because there is a lot of rules and compliances and things, so that local cannot just, they don't have capacity to compete with an international organizations. And we have lack of confidence and lack of long-term and multi-year funding. And locals, they don't have access to overhead costs or administrative costs during the implementation of the projects. And what we have realized, people are talking about localizations, but we have realized that there is a resistance to change by international organizations and other large organizations. Local actors are limited to a secondary role during the formulation and implementation of response. That means like even partnership with international and UN, even if for a long time does not empower the local NGOs, and even they are just by nature focused on the provision of the services. That means they are just there for subcontracting. And this excessive dependence on subcontracting remains an obstacle to the development of local NGOs towards autonomy, because it is not a true partnership. We believe that a true partnership values all the stakeholders involved. The process and activities are designed together based on complementarity and draws the strength of each other to meet the real needs of the communities. Another challenge we are facing is the donor perceptions of financial risk. Institutional donors are focusing very much on the risk of fraud, risk of mismanagement, risk of unprofitable programs, risk of legal and anti-terrorist risk that are in no way relevant to our context. Regarding the commitment to channel more funding as directly as to local actors, the humanitarian system is simply not delivering on its promises. Progress has been too slow. We have a long way to go towards the 25% as laid out in the Grand Bargain. This will take us now the effect and consequences that the communities are facing during the forgotten crisis. We can just mention several damages, but the most are like the rate of food insecurity, malnutrition, access to drinking water, the poverty index, and so on, remain the same over the last 5-10 years in Eastern Chad, where NGOs and UN have been active for decades. Why I'm just taking the example of Eastern Chad, and then I'm going to talk about the water sector. There is a lot of other sectors that need to be talking about during the time. I'm going to talk about the water sector. I'm glad that this morning Tirana mentioned the Sudan crisis. The Sudan crisis, the Darfur crisis in 2003. This is where I start my humanitarian work. And when we went there for the first time in Eastern Chad has welcomed more than 400,000 refugees from Darfur. And our priority at that time was just water in the area. Eastern Chad, there is no underground, in most of the area, no underground water. And imagine 400,000 came from Sudan. And now, in 2023, our priority in east of Chad is still water. This is where we, as a local, we have decided to create a local NGO and to continue the work that Help from Germany has started in the water sector. And then the demographic has increased or multiplied by 10. And all these people are depending on the same resources, like water resources. And then still, after 20 years of humanitarian work, people used to, women and girls, go to the bushes. They just have to cut the trees to make like the firewood and then to cook with it. We didn't find any other solution for them. And then that Darfur crisis has mobilized more than 200 organizations at that time in 2003 because it has a big noise. And then, I don't know, more than billions of dollars has been mobilized. And most of the organizations and donors left the areas around 2013. But we as local, we stayed, and then we continue to search for water for our people. Last year's report says less than 1 out of 2 children in Chad are lacking drinking water. A young Chadian girl spent about 62 days a year fetching water than studying. The lack of access to safe drinking water and sanitation is amongst the leading cause of deaths in Chad. About 16,000 children under the age of 5 died each year. And these deaths are largely caused by contaminated water. Just before I leave, the beginning of October, MSF has a report in one of the regions, which is called Hajar Lamis region. It's just closer to N'Djamena, to the capital region. In this area, it's only MSF which is working there. And then there is a report about contaminated water and lack of food. And in this center of MSF, most of the children which are just coming under the 5 years are suffering from diarrhea, and then they are going to be malnourished. And when MSF find out, because they are using a contaminated water. These figures make Chad one of the poorest countries in the world in terms of access to clean water and sanitation, and with enormous health economic consequences. We as local, we can say that all this happened simply because the current system put in place by the Humanitarian has failed. And this will take us to the recommendation of advocacies. Our first recommendation is to adopt a fair culture of partnership by avoiding a subcontracting approach, to stop the system of poaching local staff and by international NGOs and UN. In order to tackle these issues, we need to encourage international players, donors, and governments to give more priorities to local players and to trust them. This includes establishing a mechanism of the participation of local NGOs in key decision-making, not only on institutional or organizational, but on planning, coordination, and management of the response. Why I'm saying that? Because everything is decided by UN or by the international organization. We as local, they just have to call us, there is this project you have to go and implement. So we are not involved in the process of implementation, research, management, and so on. Another obstacle is to remove unnecessary barriers in the funding of process. This is like allow proposal to be simple, as I said earlier, short and submitted in the local language. Most of the time, proposals will come in English, and Chad is the French-speaking country. So you have to translate everything and then before the people to write the proposal. Distributing aid rather than concentrating in easily accessible area. This is, I'm talking about the case of Lake Chad region and other area in eastern of Chad. Humanitarians, international organization used to just be in the area which is very easy to access. They don't want to go deep down, like in the island for Lake Chad or close to the border with Sudan and all these things. Fund and support capacity building and empowerment of local actors so that they can lead emergency and post-emergency preparedness and response in their own context. Local actors are the first to respond, must be supported to lead humanitarian actions during a sudden onset or chronic crisis. Here, because you don't find any local actors who is like specialized in distribution food or in water sector or in education. Most of the time when there is crisis, there is always an international organization or the UN has to be first because they are specialized in this, they are specialized in this. When I take the example of WFP, they are in Chad more than 50 years, but never tried to make a localization to one or two organizations that has to be specialized in food distribution, so that if there is an onset crisis, they can just take over quickly before the international community can join. At the present, the existing funding mechanism totally excludes local NGOs. We need to set up a mechanism to mobilize and structure local players and to link them directly to improve access to various types of funding. Financial partnership, common fund managed by the United Nations, recovery of direct, indirect costs, etc. When we take the example of ECHO and a lot of other big donors, they don't want to give directly money to the local NGOs. It's always either international organization or through the UN. And then for all this to happen, there needs to be a fundamental change at the certain level to ensure a fair and appropriate sharing of role and responsibility with locals. This has to start with a lot of changes. First of all, it has to be a change in attitude This is like the perceptions, how donors see the locals, the change of approach. This is the procedures and means, and the change of collaborations, the way of working. It is from this point that we can really begin the localization process. And from my experience, from my point of view, all this is possible if we really want to. And it is also possible to keep it like this for another 50 years. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. I would like now to call Fatima Khaddour from Lebanon. Fatima is the head of programs from Basmeh and Zeitoonah, a refugee-led grassroots organization. She's also based in the Middle East and was involved in the relief responses to the Syrian crisis, the COVID-19 response in Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey. Fatima and her organization have also been providing support to the victims of Beirut explosion in Lebanon for the past 2 years, and she will talk to us as a fast responder what they see on the ground. Please welcome Fatima.
Thank you. Thank you all. It is a pleasure to be with all of you here today. I would like to start by thanking Help Germany for giving us this opportunity as local actors to be here and putting all the efforts to ensure that we are given the floor to communicate and to share our perspectives. So thank you to my colleagues. I would like also to start by introducing the organizations that I represent. I work for a local organization called Basmeh and Zeitoonah, and for those who don't know much Arabic, it means smile and olive. Basmeh and Zeitoonah is a grassroots refugee-led organization that works in the Middle East region, mainly Lebanon, Turkey, and Iraq. We focus on services related to education, protection, food security, and livelihood, in addition to advocacy and supporting other local organizations. BNZ has been one of the main actors in the Middle East region, responding to crises like Badra has introduced, including Beirut port explosion in 2020, and also COVID-19, and most recently the Turkey-Syria earthquake response. I would like to start by talking about what does it mean to be a local actor. It means to be the first responder. It means to represent and be accountable to local communities, to represent them in the structure of the organization, including staff and management. It means to advocate for their rights and for their needs. Basically, local communities expect local actors to act. However, we have noticed that recently, or over the past few years, the term local is associated with lack of professionalism, lack of accountability, and lack of experience. There is no doubt that this is related directly to the colonial notions that funding carries, under the salvation mindset. However, it is very interesting to see the rise of the localization agenda as a corrective movement. Localization agenda, as we all know, is an agenda of empowerment. It aims to shift the power dynamics from funding countries, developed countries, to local actors. It aims to give local actors the voice and the resources to be able to take over leadership over their realities. But through different discussions and engaging in different calls for proposals, we have also noticed that the localization agenda has been reduced to no more than a capacity building component. So why are we talking about localization when the topic of this presentation is to shed the light on the impact of the shift in funding and attention on humanitarian response? Well, basically because they correlate. As a local actor, we struggle with the fluctuation in funding and lack of consistency due to changes in political and media attention. Although humanitarian reports in Lebanon has been showing an increase in the needs due to the socio-economic crisis and due to the aftermath of the Beirut port explosion and also the enduring Syrian crisis. However, donor fatigue for Syria response and also due to the geopolitical context in the region, we have noticed a significant decrease in funding for Lebanon. Political consideration and media attention has been focusing on other issues, including Afghanistan, Ukraine, and earthquake. We are also noticing that the dynamics around the Syrian refugees' right to safe return to Syria has changed, ignoring safe measures for their return. This is very important, as funding for response in host communities and countries has also decreased. In a quick comparison for funding trends in the region, focusing on Basmeh and Zeitoonah as a local actor, we noticed that by the end of August 2023, we were able to reach only 1,300 households, which is the lowest number since 2016. But for our earthquake response in Turkey and Syria, we were able to reach over 64,000 households. This decrease in funding is not only limited to Basmeh and Zeitoonah. Rather, the situation is the same for all partners for the Regional Refugee and Resilience Plan known as the 3RP. 2020 has recorded the lowest level of funding since 2015. Of course, the gravity of the funding shortage and decrease affect partners differently, based on their size, based on their base as well, whether they are international, regional, or local. The impact of funding decrease is serious for local actors. Firstly, it compromises the community's trust, as we are no longer able to provide the same services we once able to provide. In terms of targeting, we are unable to reach the same number of households, which means leaving more vulnerable families behind. In a deprived and vulnerable community, this means that the risk of increased tension and violence will increase against those who receive aid and also against those who provide it. Another challenge is the loss of accumulated experience, as staff can't be retained due to budget cuts. When funding fluctuates, we can't plan for steady growth, and we are unable to sustain interventions that see our communities develop. For the thousands of children who need non-formal education, we are only able to provide basic needs. While sometimes cuts in funding are inevitable, in a complex context like the one in Lebanon, it must be associated with reforms and measures to ensure that people who are in need of help are not forgotten and left behind. Sudden cuts in funding can worsen the situation for those who have no way out and need support. It is against the basic humanitarian principles of do no harm and the good humanitarian donorship principle, which requires donors to work together and to be held accountable and to also distribute funding in proportion to need. Over the years, we have developed different strategies to deal with these situations. We have been considering calls for funding that targets local actors. However, we are challenged by the unrealistic requirements of these calls, as they require local actors to be innovative, to be efficient, yet there is no coverage for overhead or for assets that are necessary for local actors to operate. Basically, mind games. To look at the bright side, we have supportive partners who actually believe in local actors. They provide us with consistent and steady sources of funding and resources that ensure that we can allocate them towards our overall operation, not only towards activities. This approach is actually empowering, as we are able to decide how to allocate these sources of fund. With this fund, we are able even to reach our vision. For example, when donors argue with us that they would prefer supporting the public education over the non-formal education, with the justification that it would be more sustainable to do so, we are able to push our agenda and to say that education is sustainable under all forms and under all conditions. We have also explored different approaches, like exploring the privatization of interventions. For example, establishing cooperatives that can sustain itself and generate income. However, refugees with no legal documents are still vulnerable to these solutions, as they would be left alone in the business world with no protection. And this takes us back to the importance of protection in the humanitarian response. Finally, BNZ has been exploring the collaboration between the non-for-profit and for-profit sectors in order to identify private sources of fund that can ensure the continuity of our interventions. And to conclude, I would like to share some recommendations. Firstly, persistent crises must not be abandoned for newer ones. Humanitarianism is not about keeping people at status quo. Rather, it is about empowering them and uplifting them by giving them the resources and tools and make them powerful. Only then we can live. Secondly, good humanitarian donorship principles must be actioned. Donors must be held accountable to effective humanitarian response that ensures equal distribution of resources to meet needs and defend positions that view all humans as worthy of support regardless of media and political pressure. Thirdly, localization should be restored to its original position as an agenda of empowerment for local actors rather than just capacity building. Empower local actors by giving them resources and core funding and acknowledge their skills and experience. Capacity building is necessary, but not only for the local actor, but also for donors. Donors must revisit their own capacities to make sure that they are adapted to the country in which they are implementing. Thank you so much for your attention and your time.
Thank you very much, Fatima. We have heard from our local experts on the 3 questions that we have put on the table. We would like now, we have, I think we are already past the 1 hour. We will take 5 minutes from your break, if that's okay. We would like to hear from you. We have a Menti survey. We will ask you questions. If you can all, if you can present the Menti survey in. So yes, if you can all maybe take a minute to fill in this survey. Our first question asks you if your organization is working with the local partners to provide humanitarian development assistance. Okay, so the answers are coming. We can all see together. So far we have 5 responses. Okay, more responses are coming. Great, we have more people working with the local partners to provide humanitarian and development assistance in the room, I believe. Okay, because of time, I would like us to move to the next question. Our presenters and experts have put on the table several recommendations. We would like to hear from you how well your organization is implementing the recommendations that we have in the main survey. Please take time to also respond to that. And then we can all see from the screen the responses that are coming from the audience. Okay, it's changing with more responses coming from the audiences. We can see that many of you are already doing an advocacy for enabling shift in donor policies towards a more direct, flexible and multi-year funding. We can also see that some areas that we would need to be doing more, especially letting the local actors take the lead when it comes to responding to sudden onset crisis. I think we are also doing less on providing overhead costs to local partners for capacity and personnel development, which is something that all our panelists have highlighted, that it's a gap that we have in the local humanitarian responses. So obviously this is something that we need to advocate for more. Okay, great. So I think I would like to thank our panelists, Nanette, who's joining us online, Mahamat and Fatima, for their wonderful presentations and for sharing with us the challenges that they feel on the ground. As someone who's also leading a local social research enterprise, I resonate with a lot of the things that you have highlighted, where most of the work that we do is to collect data for international researchers who are not in the country. And I'm hoping that we will take these recommendations with all of us, that will be an advocates for the causes that we have just highlighted. And hopefully we will form a better partnership with the local actors, whether they are involved in the humanitarian responses, but also in the research sector as well. Our call to action from this session today is that we, of course, redouble the advocacy efforts that support the neglected communities living in this area, those communities that we are all trying to serve, who are not only living in countries where sudden and onset crises are affected, but also those who are living in the prolonged crisis, and ensure also that the local actors are given the chance to lead the recovery of their communities by tapping into their resourcefulness, knowledge, as we have seen, and also expertise, and by forming also long-term and meaningful partnerships, so that together we can ensure that every community has the opportunity to thrive with dignity. We wish you well throughout the rest of the sessions, and for those of you who came to Pardine for the first time, like me, I wish after the conference that you will also take time to see the city. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy your break.